The council chamber stretched wide like an ocean of metal and light. Thousands of seats filled with creatures from across the galaxy, each one different from the next. Some had scales, others had tentacles, and a few glowed with their own inner fire. At the center platform stood Teeman Park, wearing the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic service. His hands rested calmly at his sides, even though his heart beat fast in his chest. "The United Nations of Earth hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council," Teeman said. His voice carried through the translators to every species present. "We thank the Council for the opportunity to participate, but we must follow our own path now." Silence filled the chamber for exactly 3 seconds. Then Councillor Varmuth of the Kelzori Empire began to laugh. His forearms spread wide as his scaled face twisted in amusement. "The humans are leaving. Oh, what a tragedy." His voice dripped with sarcasm that needed no translation. Several other councillors joined in the laughter. Teeman stood perfectly still. He had expected this reaction. Humanity had spent 40 years as junior members of the council, always thanked politely, but never truly heard. Their ideas were filed away. Their warnings were ignored. Their offers of help were accepted with the same enthusiasm. One might show a child offering to help build a starship dot at the back of the Earth delegation. Dr. Hana Choi watched the scene with sadness pulling at her heart. She clutched a data tablet containing 50 years of human research. Medical techniques that could save millions. Agricultural methods that could feed entire worlds. Translation algorithms that worked better than anything the Council currently used. She had tried to present these findings dozens of times. Each time, the Council's archivists had nodded, smiled, and stored the data in files that would never be opened. Beside her, Jiwon Kim whispered quietly, "They don't even care that we're going." Hannah nodded. "They never cared that we were here." High Chancellor Drexener raised one of his crystalline appendages for silence. The laughter died down slowly, like water draining from a sink. "The Council accepts Earth's withdrawal," he announced in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "We wish humanity well in their future endeavors. All Earth citizens must vacate Council space within 6 standard months." Director Jung-Ho Nam, the eldest member of Earth's delegation, stood up from his seat. His gray hair was cut short in military fashion, even though he had left the service 20 years ago. "We will comply with all terms," he said formally. "We leave behind our research archives and technical documentation as a final contribution to the Council's knowledge base." A young woman in the human delegation shifted uncomfortably. Advisor Mayim Lee had only been with the diplomatic corps for 2 years, but she had studied galactic history for most of her life. She knew that great powers had fallen before because they dismissed smaller civilizations. She wanted to speak, to warn the Council that they were making a mistake. But when she looked at Director Nam's face, she saw that he had already made peace with this decision. The vote proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Species after species voted to accept humanity's withdrawal. Not one voted against it. Not one asked them to reconsider. The final count appeared on the massive display screens. Unanimous approval. Teeman bowed once to the assembly, a gesture of respect that few of them understood. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. The entire human delegation followed him in silence. Behind them, the council chamber buzzed with conversations that had already moved on to other topics. Humanity's departure was already forgotten. In orbit around the council station, Captain Sang-Yuk Ro stood on the bridge of the colony vessel Horizon's Promise. Through the massive view screen, he could see the station that had been humanity's window to the galaxy for 4 decades. It gleamed like a jewel, built by 100 species working together. Humans had helped build sections of it. Human engineers had solved problems that had stumped council designers. But there were no plaques acknowledging that contribution. No records that mentioned human hands in its construction. Navigation. Plot a course to the Galactic Rim, Sang-Yuk ordered. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, their fingers dancing across control panels. Captain, we're receiving departure clearance from station control, his communications officer reported. They're not even asking why we're leaving. Sang-Yuk smiled without humor. They never asked why we stayed, either. The Horizon's promise was just one of 50 vessels departing that day. Across Council space, human outposts were packing up. Human scientists were closing their labs. Human teachers were saying goodbye to alien students who would miss them more than the Council would on the station's commercial deck. A Threxan shopkeeper watched as his human business partner loaded the last boxes onto a transport cart. You don't have to go. The insectoid creature clicked through his translator. The Council's decision doesn't mean individuals must leave. The human woman shook her head. My people need me more than the Council ever did. She placed one hand gently on the Threxan's chitinous arm. I'll miss you, friend. But this isn't home anymore. Back in the Council chamber, the delegates had moved on to discussing trade routes and mining rights. Only young Mayan Li sat in the empty human section, watching the stars through the transparent dome above. She thought about all the years humanity had spent trying to prove their worth, all the innovations they had shared, all the friendships they had built with individual aliens who saw past species barriers. None of it had mattered to the Council as a whole. And now humanity was leaving to find their own way among the stars. Mayan wondered if the Council would someday regret this moment. But looking at the delegates below, arguing about profit margins and territory disputes, she doubted they would even remember it. The last human ship departed Council space, exactly 5 months and 29 days later. The Council's records noted the withdrawal in a single line of text, filed under minor administrative changes. No one marked it as significant. No one suggested it might be important. The galaxy continued turning, and the Council thought itself complete without humanity. 50 years passed like sand through an hourglass. The Galactic Council grew larger and seemingly stronger. The Khazari Empire expanded its military fleets to protect trade routes. The crystalline Vethians dominated commerce across 30 systems. The insectoid Threxans controlled the information networks that connected every Council world. High Chancellor Drexner presided over what all the statistics claimed was an age of unprecedented prosperity. Nobody talked about the humans anymore. They had become a footnote in galactic history, a small species that had come and gone without leaving a mark. At least, that was what everyone believed. Council technician Burvow stood in the maintenance bay of Station Prime, staring at a food synthesizer that refused to work. He was a Kelzari, smaller than most of his species, with 3 arms instead of the usual 4. This made him perfect for crawling into tight spaces to fix broken equipment. But this particular machine had him completely confused. The design is simple, he muttered to himself, studying the schematic on his datapad. Protein matrix combines with nutrient base, energy pulse activates molecular bonding, and food emerges. Simple, except it was not working. The synthesizer produced gray sludge instead of actual meals. Burval had replaced every component twice. He had followed the instruction manual perfectly. The machine should work. But it did not. He noticed something odd in the corner of the schematic. A small note in text so tiny he almost missed it. Human Compact Design Standard, version 3.7. Burville had seen these notes before on dozens of different devices. Food synthesizers, air recyclers, water purifiers, medical scanners. All of them had human touches in their design. The original human-made components had lasted decades. But now they were wearing out, and the replacements that other species manufactured were not quite right. They looked identical. The measurements matched. But something was missing. some understanding that the humans had possessed and never fully explained in their documentation. Bertel tried one more adjustment, then gave up for the day. Station personnel would have to eat standard rations again tonight. It was not a disaster, but it was another small inconvenience in a growing list of small inconveniences in the Council's Central Research Facility. Research Director Cal Thos reviewed the yearly innovation reports. He was a Vethian, his crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns as he moved. The reports showed steady progress in all fields of science. New ships were being designed. Medical treatments were being refined. Everything seemed fine, his assistant, a young researcher named Pixthro from a species with gray skin and large eyes, hesitated before speaking. Director, I have noticed something odd in the historical data. Kalthos turned to face her, his crystal facets clicking softly. What is odd? The rate of innovation has declined 17% over the past 50 years, Pixthro explained, displaying graphs on the holographic screen. We are still making progress, but more slowly than before. I tried to identify the cause, and the decline started exactly when the humans departed. Kyolthos made a sound like shattering glass, which was how Vethians laughed. Correlation is not causation, young one. The humans contributed very little to Council science. This decline is probably just a normal variation in research cycles. Pixthra wanted to argue, but she was too junior to challenge a director. She returned to her station and saved her research in a private file. Something felt wrong, but she could not prove it yet. Far away on the galactic rim, beyond the boundaries that the Council considered civilized space, humanity had been busy. New Pyongyang was a world of red deserts and purple skies, nothing like Earth, but beautiful in its own way. Governor Manzeoan stood on the balcony of the administrative center, looking out at a city that had not existed when she was born. Reports from the outer colonies. Governor, her aide Hyung Woo-beek said, approaching with a datapad. He was young and efficient, always ready with the information she needed. Manzeo took the datapad and scrolled through the data. 50 colonies had become 500. Populations that had numbered in the thousands now counted in the billions. Humans had spread across the rim like a flower blooming in fast motion. And the communication network? She asked. Hyun-woo smiled. The new quantum relay system is online. We can now communicate instantly with any human colony within 10,000 light years. The Council's best systems still need days or weeks for the same distances. Minseo nodded slowly. This was classified information, kept secret from the galaxy at large. Humanity had made technological leaps that the Council could not imagine. Not because humans were smarter, but because they approached problems differently. They thought in ways that the rigid Council structure had never encouraged. In orbit above New Pyongyang, Admiral Soman Kwan walked through the hangar bay of the battleship Indomitable. Rows of fighter craft lined the deck, each one sleek and deadly. Pilots ran drills, their movements sharp and practiced. Admiral on deck. Someone shouted, but Soman waved away the formality. She stopped beside one of the fighters and ran her hand along its hull. The metal was smooth and warm to the touch, embedded with technology that the Council had never developed. Human ships could change their energy signatures, making them invisible to conventional scanners. Human weapons could adapt their frequencies to penetrate any known shielding. Human pilots trained in tactics that mixed ancient Earth warfare with cutting-edge technology. None of this was shared with the galaxy. Humanity remembered how the Council had dismissed them, had laughed at their departure. They had learned to keep their secrets. How many ships in the defense fleet now? Someone asked her second-in-command. 3,000 capital ships, Admiral. 15,000 support vessels. And pilots ready to fly them all. Soman smiled. 50 years ago, humanity had left Council space with a handful of old ships and a lot of determination. Now they had a fleet that could protect their expanding territory from any threat. Not that anyone in Council space knew about it. Back on Station Prime, Burval finally gave up on the food synthesizer and called for it to be completely replaced. The new unit arrived within a day, manufactured to the exact same specifications. It worked better than the broken one, but still not as well as the original human design models had worked. In the cafeteria that evening, station personnel complained about the food tasting bland. Not bad enough to report, just slightly off. Another small inconvenience that people accepted because there seemed to be no better option. High Chancellor Drexner gave a speech that night, broadcast across all Council worlds. He talked about prosperity and unity. He mentioned the great achievements of the past 50 years. He never once mentioned humanity because they had been forgotten entirely. On New Pyongyang, Governor Min Seo-an watched a recording of that speech. Hyun-woo stood beside her, waiting for her reaction. "Do you think they even remember us?" he asked. Min Seo turned off the recording. "I think they remember we existed, but I do not think they understand what they lost when we left. Should we care?" Min Seo looked out at the stars, at the vast territory that humanity now called home. "No," she said quietly. "We should focus on building our own future." The Council made their choice. In the research facility, young Pixthra stayed late, comparing old human research files with current Council projects. The more she read, the more disturbed she became. Human fingerprints were everywhere in Council technology, hiding in plain sight. But when she mentioned this to colleagues, they dismissed her concerns the same way Director Kalthos had. The galaxy continued turning, and the Council believed itself complete and prosperous. The small problems were just small problems, nothing to worry about. The missing innovation was just a statistical variation. The humans were gone and forgotten, and everything was fine. Everything was fine. The first warning came from a mining outpost on the edge of Council space. The message was brief and terrifying. Unknown vessels approaching. They are not responding to hails. They are not, then silence. The outpost vanished from all sensors as if it had never existed. The Council dismissed it as a technical malfunction. Equipment failed sometimes, especially at remote locations. They sent a repair ship to investigate. That ship also went silent. Then an entire colony world stopped transmitting. 3 million Threxans lived on that world. Search and rescue teams found nothing but empty buildings and scorch marks that covered the planet's surface. Not a single body was recovered. It was as if every living thing had been erased. The Krell swarm had arrived. They came from dark space, from the voids between galaxies where no one had thought to look. They were not like any species the Council had encountered before. The Krell did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They simply consumed everything organic in their path, breaking down living matter to fuel their endless reproduction. Fleet. Commander Dexawa led the first major engagement against the Krell. He commanded 200 warships, the pride of the Kelzari military. His strategy was simple and proven. Overwhelming firepower combined with superior numbers. It had worked against pirates and rebels for 100 years. Thought it did not work against the Krell. The battle lasted 6 hours. Dexawa's fleet managed to destroy dozens of Krell ships in the first assault. But the Krell adapted with impossible speed. Weapons that had worked in the first hour became useless by the third hour. The Krell learned to redirect energy blasts, to absorb plasma fire, to turn the Council's own weapons against them. By the end of the battle, only 37 Council ships escaped. Dexawa was not among the survivors. The Krell swarm continued advancing, consuming 2 more systems before the Council could organize a defense. Panic spread through Council space like fire through dry grass. The member species demanded action, protection, answers. High Chancellor Drexner called emergency sessions every day, but solutions were hard to find. Traditional military tactics failed against an enemy that adapted to every attack. Senior researcher Marvin, an elderly Vethian whose crystal body had started to develop cracks from age, spent days in the archives searching for anything that might help. He had lived through 3 wars in his long life, and he knew that sometimes old wisdom was more valuable than new weapons. Deep in the historical files, he found something unexpected. Military theory documents from the human delegation, filed away decades ago and never read. The title caught his attention: Adaptive Strategic Doctrine in Asymmetric Warfare. Marvin began to read, and as he read, his confusion grew. The document did not talk much about weapons or ships. Instead, it discussed psychology, unpredictability, creativity in combat. It spoke of winning battles by doing what the enemy could not predict, by adapting faster than they could respond. Warfare is not mathematics, one passage read. It is art. The side that can create new solutions faster than the opponent can counter them will always have the advantage. Marvin tried to explain these concepts to the military commanders, but they struggled to understand. The Council's way of warfare was based on calculations, simulations, and proven tactics. This human approach seemed almost chaotic, relying on individual initiative and creative thinking rather than coordinated planning. In the council chambers, Counselor Zinther, an insectoid Thraxan who had lost family in the attacks, stood before the assembly. "We must seek help," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and chirps into common language. The humans, they understood warfare differently. Perhaps they have knowledge that could save us. High Chancellor Draxner's crystalline form seemed to darken. The humans have been gone for 50 years. We do not even know where their colonies are now. And even if we did, it would be beneath the Council's dignity to crawl back to a species we dismissed. Dignity does not matter when billions are dying. Zinther shouted. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some agreed with Zinther. Others sided with Drexner. In the end, pride won over practicality. The Council would handle this crisis themselves, but they could not. System after system fell to the Krell swarm. The Council's fleets, even working together, could not stop an enemy that learned from every battle. Casualties climbed into the millions, then tens of millions. In a small office on Station Prime, Intelligence Officer Yaren Song watched the reports with growing horror. She looked like a Thraxan to everyone who saw her, her disguise maintained by technology that the Council did not know existed. But beneath the false appearance, she was fully human. Yaren had been deep undercover for 30 years, watching and reporting back to Earth's External Affairs Department. She had volunteered for this assignment knowing she might never return home, that she would age while pretending to be an alien species. But someone needed to keep an eye on the Council, to make sure they did not become a threat to humanity's new colonies. Now she watched as the Council faced extinction, and they still refused to ask for help. She sent an encrypted message through channels that took weeks to reach human space. The Council is dying. Krell swarm consuming everything. They will not ask for help. Recommend standby for possible intervention. On Earth, President Yeho Kang received the message and immediately called his cabinet together. Defense Minister Yoon Ji-seo arrived first, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. Foreign Minister Won Bin-han came next, looking worried. "How bad is it?" Kang asked, displaying the report on the central screen. Yoon-ji pulled up tactical assessments that human intelligence had gathered. "The Krell are unlike anything we have faced, but our simulation suggests that our adaptive tactics would be effective against them. We could stop this invasion. At what cost?" Wanbin asked quietly. "Significant casualties. Perhaps 10,000 dead, 50,000 wounded if we commit fully. And that is if everything goes well." Kang sat back in his chair. feeling the weight of the decision ahead. They laughed at us when we left. They called our contributions meaningless. They have not asked for our help, even as they face extinction. But millions of innocent people are dying, Yunji said. Not the counselors who dismissed us. Regular people. Children. Families. Does it matter if their leaders were fools? The debate continued for hours. Some cabinet members argued that humanity owed the council nothing. Others insisted that saving lives was its own justification. Kong listened to all of them, knowing that ultimately the decision would be his alone. Meanwhile, 6 months into the war, the council had lost 30% of its territory. The Krell showed no signs of slowing. If anything, they were accelerating as they consumed more resources and produced more ships. The Battle of Vethian Prime was the breaking point. The crystalline homeworld, one of the council's founding members, was overrun despite the largest defensive fleet ever assembled. Billions of Vethians died as their cities were consumed. The survivors fled in refugee ships, carrying what little they could save. In the council chambers, Junior Counselor Pixthra stood up without being called upon. She was no longer the young researcher who had been dismissed decades ago. She had spent years studying the old human files, understanding what the council had lost. "We need humanity," she said into the stunned silence following the fall of Vethian Prime. "Not because we are weak, but because we were arrogant." The humans understood something we did not. They saw warfare as creativity, not calculation. And we dismissed them for it. Archivist Lenara, who had worked with Pixthra on reviewing the old human files, stood up as well. "I have found something," he announced, his voice trembling. "I have reviewed every major advancement the Council has made in the past century. Medical breakthroughs, agricultural improvements, peaceful expansion protocols. Almost all of them have human fingerprints hidden in their foundations." He displayed the data on the chamber's main screen. File after file showed human contributions that had been absorbed into council knowledge and forgotten. The humans had not been peripheral to the council's success. They had been foundational. The chamber fell silent as the truth settled over them. Like a heavy blanket. High Chancellor Drexner finally spoke, his voice like cracking ice. "Send a delegation to human space. Find them. Ask for their help." Pride had lost to necessity, but it might already be too late. The council delegation departed for human space with little ceremony and less hope. Councilor Varmuth led the mission, the same Kalazari who had laughed at humanity's departure 50 years ago. He was older now, his scales dulled with age, but his pride remained mostly intact. He accepted this assignment with reluctance, certain that the humans would be primitive colonists barely surviving on rim worlds. The journey took 3 weeks. As the delegation's ship traveled beyond council space, Varmuth noticed something that troubled him. The star charts showed human settlements spread across hundreds of systems. Not small outposts, but established colonies with significant populations. When had the humans expanded so much? "Approaching human border," the pilot announced. "We are being scanned by defense platforms." Varmuth looked at the sensors. Dozens of military installations orbited this system, their weapons tracking the council ship with disturbing precision. The technology signature was unlike anything in council databases. Advanced, powerful, completely unknown. A communication came through. "Council vessel, this is Checkpoint Sejong Border Control. State your purpose." Varmuth stepped forward. "This is Counselor Varmuth of the Galactic Council. We request a diplomatic meeting with human leadership to discuss a matter of urgent importance." There was a pause. Then a different voice responded, crisp and professional. "This is Captain Borum Shin, Station Commander. You are cleared to dock at berth 7. Please power down all weapon systems and submit to security screening." The delegation had no choice but to comply. As their ship approached the station, Varmuth stared out the viewport in growing disbelief. Checkpoint Sejong was massive, easily 3 times the size of any council border station. Ships moved in organized patterns, military vessels mixed with civilian transports. The level of activity suggested a civilization that was not merely surviving but thriving. Captain Borm Shin met them at the airlock. She was a human woman in her 40s, wearing a neat uniform with insignia that Varmuth did not recognize. Her expression was polite but not warm. "Welcome to Checkpoint Sejong," she said. "If you will follow me, we have prepared a diplomatic suite for your delegation." As they walked through the station, Varmuth could not stop looking around. The corridors were clean and well-maintained. The technology was sophisticated. Humans and various alien species worked side by side, but these were not council species. These were peoples from the Rim, groups that the council had never bothered to contact. "Captain Shin," Varmuth said carefully, "we were not aware that humanity had expanded so extensively." Borum smiled slightly. "There is much the council is not aware of, Counselor. Please, wait here. I will forward your request for a meeting to the appropriate authorities." The delegation waited for 3 days. Varmuth grew increasingly frustrated with each passing hour. Did the humans not understand the urgency? The council was dying. Billions were at risk. Yet they were kept waiting like common merchants seeking trade permits. On the 3rd day, Borum returned with coordinates to a diplomatic station deeper in human territory. The journey took another week. Varmuth used the time to review everything the delegation had learned. Human space was vast. Their technology was advanced. Their society appeared stable and prosperous. Everything the council had assumed about humanity's post-departure fate was wrong. The diplomatic station, called Unity Station, was beautiful in a way that surprised Varmuth. It blended human aesthetics with influences from dozens of species, creating something unique and welcoming. But the delegate who met them there was not welcoming. He was professional and courteous, but there was steel beneath his politeness. "I am Ambassador Sun-Ho Lim," the human said, gesturing for them to sit at a conference table. "I understand you have an urgent matter to discuss." Varmuth swallowed his pride and explained the situation. The Krell swarm, the falling systems, the millions dead, the council's inability to stop an enemy that adapted to every tactic. As he spoke, Sun-Ho listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing. When Varmuth finished, silence filled the room. Sun-Ho stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "You are asking for military assistance," Sun-Ho said finally. It was not a question. "Yes, the council requests that humanity share tactical knowledge and, if possible, provide direct military support." Sun-Ho turned back to face them. "Counselor Varmuth, do you remember the day humanity withdrew from the council?" Varmuth shifted uncomfortably. "I remember." "You laughed. You suggested that humanity's contributions were meaningless. You voted to accept our departure without a single word of regret." Sun-Ho's voice remained calm, but his words cut like knives. "Now you come asking for help after 50 years of silence." "I was wrong," Varmuth said, and the admission burned in his throat. "We were all wrong. We did not understand what humanity offered. We were arrogant and dismissive. But that does not change the fact that billions of innocent people are dying." Sun-Ho nodded slowly. "You are correct. The people suffering now are not the ones who dismissed us." He returned to his seat. "I will forward your request to the human government, but I cannot make promises. The decision of whether to intervene rests with our leadership, and they will need to consider many factors." "How long will this take?" Varmuth asked. "As long as it takes. We are not the council, Counselor. We do not make hasty decisions without full deliberation. We do not have time for lengthy deliberations." Systems are falling every week. Sunho's expression did not change. Then you should have come sooner. Or better yet, you should have listened 50 years ago when we tried to share our knowledge with you. The delegation was given quarters on the station to wait for a response. Days turned into weeks. Varmoth paced his room, feeling desperation creep into his thoughts. He tried to learn more about human capabilities, but information was carefully controlled. He saw military ships passing through the station, vessels that moved with a grace that council ships lacked. He saw human officers talking with alien personnel in a way that suggested deep cooperation and mutual respect. One evening, Junior Counselor Pixteru, who had been part of the delegation, approached Varmoth. "I have been talking to some of the station personnel," she said quietly. "The humans have built something remarkable here. A coalition of species working together as equals, not a hierarchy like the Council." "That is very nice for them," Varmoth said bitterly. "But it does not help us now, does it not? Perhaps we should be asking ourselves why they succeeded where we failed. Why species that the Council ignored have chosen to align with humanity instead." Varmoth had no answer. After 5 weeks, Ambassador Sunho summoned the delegation again. Varmoth entered the conference room with his heart pounding in his chest. Sunho's expression revealed nothing. "The United Nations of Humanity has reached a decision regarding your request," Sunho said formally. "President Khan will address you directly." A holographic display activated, showing a human man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. President Yao Kang looked at the council delegation with an expression that mixed sadness and resignation. "Councilor Varmoth, members of the Galactic Council," Kang began. "We have studied your request carefully. We have reviewed intelligence reports on the Krull swarm. We understand the severity of the crisis you face." Varmoth leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "Humanity will intervene," Kang said, and Varmoth felt relief flood through him. "But we will do so on our terms. We will not place ourselves under Council authority. Our forces will operate independently, coordinating with Council fleets but not subordinate to them. And when this crisis is over, there will be a renegotiation of humanity's relationship with galactic civilization." "Anything," Varmoth said. "We accept any terms." Kang's expression softened slightly. "Counselor, we are not doing this for the Council. We are doing this for the billions of innocent lives at stake. Remember that when this is over." The transmission ended. Varmoth sat back in his chair, feeling both grateful and deeply ashamed. The humans were coming to save them, but the cost to Council pride would be immense. Ambassador Sunho stood. "You may return to Council space and inform your leadership. The first human expeditionary fleet will arrive in Council space within 2 weeks. I suggest you prepare your forces to coordinate with commanders who will not tolerate incompetence or arrogance." As the delegation prepared to depart, Varmoth took one last look at Unity Station. This was what the Council could have had if they had listened to humanity all those years ago. A true partnership of equals. But pride had blinded them, and now they would learn humility through fire and blood. The journey back, too. Council space seemed longer than the journey out. Varmoth spent the time preparing his report, knowing that it would change everything. The humans were not the primitive colonists he had imagined. They were a power that had grown strong in the shadows, while the Council had stagnated, and now they were coming to save the galaxy that had dismissed them. Whether the Council would learn from this lesson remained to be seen. The debate on Earth lasted for 3 days and nights. President Yao Kang sat in the Situation Room, surrounded by his cabinet and military advisors. The holographic display showed the latest intelligence from Council space. Red zones marked systems lost to the Crow. Yellow zones showed areas under attack. The green zones grew smaller every day. We are looking at potentially 10,000 casualties, General Yuna Chai said, highlighting regions on the map. The Krell are spread across multiple fronts. Even with our tactical advantages, this will be a bloody campaign. Defense Minister Yoon Ji-seo leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. But if we do nothing, we are looking at billions of deaths. Not just Council species. There are hundreds of smaller civilizations caught in the Krell's path. Species that have nothing to do with the Council's past arrogance. Foreign Minister Wang Banhan shook his head slowly. I understand the moral argument. I truly do. But we must consider the precedent we set. If we rush to save the Council every time they face a crisis, we become their military instead of their equals. We are not saving the Council, Councilor Nari Hong said firmly. She was one of the oldest members of the government, a woman who had voted against withdrawal 50 years ago. We are saving innocent lives. There's a difference. Director Dayan Oh of External Affairs brought up a different perspective. We have thrived in independence. Our economy is strong. Our people are happy. Our technology advances rapidly. We achieved all of this without the Council. Do we want to tie ourselves to a sinking ship? The argument went in circles. Each point had merit. Each perspective held truth. Kang listened to them all, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. Then Dr. Subin Lim asked to speak. She was a xenobiologist, not usually part of military decisions, but she had requested to present evidence. Kang nodded, and she activated a video feed. The images showed Krell-occupied zones. Cities reduced to ash. Refugee camps overflowing with traumatized survivors. A small child of some species Kang did not recognize, crying over the body of its parent. The footage was brutal and heartbreaking. These are the people we are debating about, Subin said quietly. Not the counselors who dismissed us. Not the leaders who laughed when we left. These are ordinary beings who did nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. She paused, letting the images speak. What kind of people do we want to be? The kind who turn away when they can help, or the kind who do what is right regardless of past grievances? The room fell silent. Kang looked around at his advisors, seeing the conflict in their faces. Finally, he spoke. We will intervene. But Minister Han is correct about the precedent. We will help, but we will do so as equals, not as saviors coming to rescue ungrateful masters. When this is over, there will be a new arrangement. Humanity will never again be dismissed or diminished. General Yuna Chai straightened in her chair. I will begin deployment immediately, Mr. President. 2 weeks later, the first human expeditionary fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Council territory. Admiral Soman Kwan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the battleship Indomitable, watching as 300 human warships materialized in perfect formation. The Council's monitoring stations detected them immediately. Confusion filled the communication channels. The Council Military Command had expected perhaps a dozen ships, maybe a few squadrons of fighters. Instead, they faced a fleet that rivaled the entire Council Navy in size and clearly surpassed it in technology. This is Admiral Soman Kwan of the United Nations Expeditionary Force. She broadcast on all Council military frequencies. We are here to assist in the defense against the Krell swarm. Council forces should prepare to coordinate operations under joint command structure. On the Council command station, Fleet Coordinator Drexcan stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. The human ships were unlike anything in the Council databases. Sleek hulls that seemed to absorb sensor sweeps. Energy signatures that shifted and changed. Weapon systems that defied classification. Where did they get this technology? He whispered. His aide, a young officer who had studied human history, answered quietly. They built it themselves. While we were stagnating, they were innovating. The first to join operation came within days. A Krell battle group was attacking a council colony in the Kelzari home system. Council forces had been fighting a desperate defensive action, losing ground steadily. When the human fleet arrived, everything changed. Commander Taejin-su led the human battle group with a style that confused the council observers. His ships did not maintain rigid formations. They moved like a living thing, flowing around the Krell vessels, striking from unexpected angles, and vanishing before the enemy could adapt. Human commander, your formations are breaking apart, a panicked council captain transmitted. You are violating all standard tactical protocols. Taijin's response was calm. Your standard protocols are why you are losing, Captain. Watch and learn. The human fighters were even more impressive. Wing Commander Seo Jun Park led squadrons in patterns that seemed chaotic but were actually brilliantly coordinated. They baited Krell ships into overextending, then struck at vulnerable points with devastating precision. When the Krell adapted to one tactic, the humans immediately shifted to something completely different. The battle lasted 6 hours. Not a single human ship was lost. The Krell battle group was completely destroyed. The council forces watched in stunned silence as the humans achieved what had seemed impossible. After the battle, council officers flooded the communication channels with questions. How did human ships move like that? What weapons were they using? How did they coordinate without rigid command structures? Taejun held a briefing with the council commanders. Your approach to warfare is too rigid, he explained. You calculate optimal strategies and execute them precisely. This works against predictable enemies. But the Krell adapt, so you need to adapt faster. That means giving individual commanders freedom to improvise, to try unexpected things, to create chaos that the enemy cannot predict. But that is inefficient, a Vethian commander protested. Individual initiative leads to mistakes. Yes, Taejin agreed. Sometimes it does. But a living, adaptive force that makes occasional mistakes will always be the perfect force that cannot change. Over the next 3 months, human forces pushed the Krell back system by system. The Battle of the Kelzari Corps became legendary. 10,000 Krell ships faced half that number of human vessels plus council support. The council commanders expected another grinding battle of attrition. Instead, Wing Commander Seo Jun Park executed a maneuver that military academies would study for generations. His fighters pretended to flee, drawing the Krell into a pursuit. When the enemy was fully committed, the fighters suddenly reversed course and dove through the Krell formation while capital ships emerged from hiding behind planetary bodies. The Krell's own tactical adaptations became a weakness as they struggled to counter moves that made no logical sense. The battle was won in 4 hours with minimal human casualties. The Krell swarm, having lost its central coordination node, fragmented and began a scattered retreat. But victory had a price. Human casualties were not the 10,000 predicted, but they were still significant. 7,000 dead, 20,000 wounded, ships damaged or destroyed, families on Earth and the colonies receiving messages that their loved ones would not be coming home. President Kang attended every funeral he could. He met with families, looked them in the eyes, and tried to explain why their sacrifices mattered. It was the hardest part of the job he had ever faced. As the Krell threat diminished, Ambassador Taemin Park, now 78 years old but still sharp, arrived at Council Station. He had been the one to announce humanity's departure 50 years ago. Now he would negotiate humanity's return. The council chambers had changed. Where once there had been thousands of delegates representing hundreds of species, now barely half that number remained. The Krell War had devastated the council's membership. Some species were extinct. Others were reduced to refugee populations. High Chancellor Drexner, his crystalline body showing cracks from stress and age, addressed the assembly. We owe humanity a debt that cannot be repaid. They came when we needed them most. They saved billions of lives. And they did this despite having every reason to let us face the consequences of our own arrogance. Tamim stood at the speaker's platform. The United Nations does not wish to humiliate the Council. We do not seek revenge for past dismissals. What we want is simple: respect, recognition, partnership as equals. The new Galactic Compact was negotiated over 6 months. Humanity would rejoin galactic civilization, but with fundamental changes. The Council would become more democratic. Smaller species would have greater representation. Decision-making would be distributed rather than centralized. And humanity would have veto power on major decisions, ensuring they could never again be dismissed or marginalized. Not everyone in the Council was happy with these terms. But they had no choice. Humanity held the military power to enforce their demands, and more importantly, they held the moral authority of having saved the galaxy. On the day the compact was signed, President Kang stood beside High Chancellor Drexner in the rebuilt council chambers.